What's going on, guys? I'm Broke. Welcome to my channel where I primarily live stream video games. Sometimes I feel the inclination to make a video about one of the games that I've played, and this happens to be one of those unique cases. This October, I decided to stream exclusively horror and horror-adjacent games. Spooky month, spooky games. This was my first time experiencing every game I chose to play, and I've enjoyed myself, for the most part. This game's gonna drive me to become an alcoholic. You watch. One of the games I really liked? Bendy and the Ink Machine. The game that launched a franchise. And I can see why. The game's art style is captivating and enhanced with a unique story and deep lore. The gameplay itself is entertaining enough. It wasn't too scary and didn't rely on cheap scares. The mechanics were simple, but simple isn't bad. They didn't take away from the gaming experience. Joey Drew Studios hit a homer with their debut title and won the hearts of their audience. Bendy and the Ink Machine was a smash hit that left its fans asking for more. The thing is, this video isn't about Bendy and the Ink Machine. I thoroughly enjoyed the first entry in the franchise, just as everyone else did. No, this video is about the first game's sequel, Bendy and the Dark Revival. I started writing the script before I even completed my initial playthrough of the game because I felt so intensely compelled to start this video. Why? Because I think Bendy and the Dark Revival is trash. You saw the title of the video, that's probably why you're here, and you most likely hold the exact opposite opinion as I do. This game appears to be universally loved, and I have no idea why. Well, I have some sort of an idea, but we'll get there. Now, before you leave a comment down below telling me how wrong I am, watch the entire video, listen to my reasoning, see my examples. I am hell-bent on changing your mind because I hate glazing bad games. If you praise developers for garbage instead of criticizing it, they're just going to keep handing you trash. Littering is a crime, and you shouldn't pay developers for the privilege of picking up their refuse. With that, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So, first I should address the reasons why I think people like this game in the first place. It's actually pretty simple. People love a great story with deep lore. Joey Drew Studios has got that with the Bendy franchise. It's a unique tale with complex backstories and an air of mystery players are itching to solve. It's all wrapped up in a sepia-toned Bendy bow, the perfect package for a mascot horror game. That's a literal selling point. The Bendy games have looked amazing. Bendy and the Ink Machine came out swinging with an art style that can only be described as a cartoonist's fever dream. The level design features strong, bold lines that resemble what I can only describe as 3D sketches. It looks unique. A minimalist design with a basic color palette is captivating, and it's fun to explore Joey Drew Studios based on the appearance alone. This world is inhabited by a, dare I say, colorful cast of characters, from the living caricatures of Alice Angel and Boris the Wolf to the inky enemies you fight in the hallways. Oftentimes, it's like you're playing through some sort of interactive art gallery. Bendy and the Dark Revival doubled down on this art style, making everything even nicer. It achieves this by introducing darker tones and more complex shading. The details pop. On top of this, Bendy and the Dark Revival introduces even more lore to the franchise, making everything a bit more complex by further developing some characters and building its world. Now, I just spent a very long time explaining to you why people like Bendy as a whole. However, great graphics and a polished story are not the only parts of a video game. This is my key argument against Bendy and the Dark Revival. The first game, Bendy and the Ink Machine, establishes its world and writes its story and leaves its audience hungry for more. They want more of what makes Bendy so good. They want more story. They want more beautiful scenery. Have you noticed what I haven't mentioned yet? It's the gameplay itself. See, while Bendy and the Ink Machine establishes the franchise as beautiful and interesting, those things overshadow the elements of the game itself. Which isn't exactly an issue with the first game, but proves to be a gigantic problem in the sequel. My entire point being, Bendy and the Dark Revival suffers from terrible game mechanics and poorly implemented game design. Yet, its audience glazes over this because the franchise doubles down on what made the first game so good. This is the crux of my argument. Look past the story and the artwork and see the game for what it is. A buggy, glitchy, sepia-toned mess that's inferior to its predecessor. I should also state, before I get into the details, if you like this game, good for you. It's okay to enjoy a bad game. I liked Men in Black 2 Alien Escape for the PlayStation 2. That doesn't mean it's an inherently good game. Video games have problems, and you've got to be wearing a blindfold to not see the ones going on here. I will reiterate my point from earlier. Stop glazing this game. There's no way it deserves a 9 out of 10 on Steam if you examine the game as a whole. I digress. As I write this script, it is becoming clear that I've got more to criticize this game on than I initially planned. So for this initial video, I will be going over Bendy and the Dark Revival's poor game mechanics. At some point, I would like to go over the game's other seriously imperfect elements, such as glitches and character flaws. For transparency, I played this game on a Steam Deck using a stock PS5 controller. Bendy and the Dark Revival isn't optimized for the Steam Deck. The disclaimer only seemed to mention small text that would be hard to read, but I will concede there could be other issues, and some of my problems could just simply be because of the way in which I'm playing the game. However, this doesn't excuse elements regarding game mechanics. A good place to start. Let's begin with what I think is one of Bendy's biggest icons, the Ink Demon. In Bendy and the Ink Machine, the Ink Demon wandered the halls of Joey Drew Studios, decimating everything it would come across. If it spots the player character, a chase ensues, and if you don't find a cabinet to hide in ASAP, you'll be caught and killed and forced to respawn at a Bendy effigy. It was probably one of the most anxiety-inducing parts of the first game. When you saw shadowy camo texture creep across the floor and heard Henry's increased heart rate, you better haul tail to the nearest storage locker or be prepared to outrun a demon. Well, this mechanic returns in Bendy and the Dark Revival, except it's a trillion times more disappointing. It's such a letdown, I'm not even sure how to describe it. Basically, anytime the Ink Demon appears, the screen color changes, and you're met with the prompt, "The Ink Demon is coming," at which point you run away to find the nearest hiding spot. You get to a safe spot before the screen flashes, you're safe. If you don't, you're jump scared by a demon. That's it. No high-stakes chase sequences, no Ink Demon stalking by the locker you're hiding in, nothing that made the Ink Demon so threatening in the first game. He went from a living, breathing presence in the environment to a countdown jump scare combo. Maybe this is supposed to make the demon feel omnipresent, however, it just comes off as extremely lazy compared to Bendy and the Ink Machine. It's super annoying too, as it happens, 1, a lot, and 2, in the most inconvenient of places. Seriously, the RNG in this game is a nightmare. As a result, you're forced to keep track of all available hiding spots in the area you're in and have a route planned out in case you need to hide. Entering a new area when the Ink Demon appears? Pray to the inky gods that there's a hiding spot very close, otherwise you probably won't find one. As the Ink Demon gets closer, the screen gets darker, and you can't tell where you're going. I had the game brightness jacked to the max, and I still had issues with this. In order to counter this, it looks like the devs tried putting these new hiding spots all over the studio in case you needed one. Barrels, crates, podiums, they all litter the ground in addition to the lockers we're all familiar with. It's thoughtful, however, I have a few issues with the entire system. First, the new hiding spots don't work during traditional combat. You can't just hide from an enemy in the middle of a fight. Initially, this sounds reasonable, until you realize you can still hide in the original lockers to get out of the exact same combat scenarios, no problem. Enemies just go back to wandering once you enter a locker. The other main issue I have with some of these new hiding spots is they're fairly unrealistic, which is hilarious given the game is about sentient ink monsters. Seriously, you're telling me that the Ink Demon isn't able to see you in one of these open-faced crates or barrels? How does this guy locate his prey exactly? It's small stuff like this that gets me shaking my head. Some lootable cabinets are the same size as hiding lockers. Who made that decision? You get used to distinguishing between the two. The locker used for hiding has a small vent on the front and a different open prompt. But come on, those two things don't need to be the same size or sitting right next to each other. The next small gripe on my list? Just let me open doors. Stop slapping a lock onto every entryway for the sake of smacking it with our pipe. It's not world building at this point. It's more like the lock's just there so we can hit it. I would have loved less locks and more loot. More on that in a minute. Because next I'm going to address Carly/Slicer, the new 4th member of the Butcher Gang. She's legitimately only here for jump scares. She can appear anywhere in front of you, materializing with this god-awful shriek. If you don't dodge her, you lose some health. But my understanding is she can't actually kill you. I hate when games employ these types of cheap scare tactics. Especially now, when it seems like every horror game has to have one by default. Carly is BendyAndTheDarkRevival's obligatory cheap scare tactic that might initially prove frightening. However, when lifting the curtain as to her actual purpose, she becomes just another annoyance throughout the game. Also, I'm pretty sure she's completely optional, which means on an initial playthrough, she's usually accidentally a self-inflicted inconvenience. Do you know what isn't a self-inflicted inconvenience? Collectibles. In BendyAndTheDarkRevival, those are just considered a normal inconvenience. Okay, maybe inconvenience is too strong of a word. What I'm trying to say is the way in which these collectibles are utilized is inefficient. See, from the very moment you step into the labyrinth that is Joey Drew Studios, you're collecting things. Batteries, casings, gent parts, toolkits, they're scattered throughout the entire game. Of course, we've been conditioned to pick up everything that gets highlighted in the video game, so players begin hoarding things right from the start of the game. It's not like these items take up space in some sort of inventory, so what's the issue here? Well, you really don't need any of this stuff until you're deep into Chapter 2. The game doesn't really explain this. I was left wondering why I was collecting all this garbage for almost a third of my playthrough. Is it a minuscule complaint? Yeah, but how many games wait a third of their playtime before introducing the purpose for collectibles? Can you name 5? No? Okay. Leapfrogging off this point, I want to address one area in the game I took a particular issue with. In Chapter 2, you make your way through a locker room. I walked into this section understanding 2 very fundamental things about video games. 1, if loot is required for gameplay, loot everything. And 2, square things that open contain loot. Therefore, a locker room seems like the ideal place to collect oodles of loot. Can you guess why I'm talking about this? If you guessed that the locker room contained maybe next to no loot, you hit the nail on the head. I must have opened 100 lockers, and maybe 10 of them had anything lootable. This fried my biscuits. Knowing what I know about video games, a locker room should have been the most lootable place in the entire game. To find items in maybe 10% of the lockers is unacceptable. Even on Fallout's hardest difficulties, I would probably be living like a king having looted a similarly lootable area. In addition to this, I began to notice this issue throughout the entire game. Most lockers were empty. A majority of them serve as set dressing, each one of them providing the player just a little dose of disappointment with each one they open. Speaking of disappointment, I would be remiss if I didn't say something about Bendy and the Dark Revival's boss fights. From what I can gather, most players consider this game to have 4 major bosses: the Widow King, Lord Amok, Twisted Alice Angel, and Shippahoy Wilson. Having finally completed the game, I can properly form an opinion on these 4 boss fights, starting with the Widow King. This is probably the worst boss fight I have ever encountered. It's bad, mostly because it relies heavily on tiny spider-like enemies. I did not enjoy spamming attacks at the ground with a pipe, especially because the attack speed is equal to that of a tortoise walking uphill, or something to that effect. Instead of spamming attacks at spiders, I found it more productive to run away from them. And even then, I died a disgusting amount of times. Eventually, I summoned the Widow King from his sewer and proceeded to die even more, especially after he took to the ceiling. Somehow, I ended up winning. I hit the monstrosity a few times with my pipe, and he perished. I don't think the king itself actually sent me back to the inky depths. All of my deaths were allotted to the spider spamming. I left this fight feeling frustrated, and it just added to the disappointment I was feeling with the game so far. The next boss fight, if you can call it that, continued that downward spiral of disappointment. See, despite my hatred for the Widow King, I consider Lord Amok to be the worst boss in the game. I didn't even realize he was a boss. While I've only seen gameplay of it, the abnormal searcher fight from Bendy and the Inca Machine looked tougher than the fight I had with this guy. Amok seems really out of place, especially when you consider our next boss fight is against series antagonist Twisted Alice. I really liked the initial puzzle aspect of this fight. The little nod to FNAF at the dinner party was nice. However, I did become frustrated with it during the actual fight itself. It took me a while to realize that there were boxes I had to use flow at the top of. That's on me, I guess, but I feel like the monitors in these rooms could have been used to establish the next portion of the puzzle. There's even more than one monitor. This fight easily could have been a few phases, with different puzzle-solving aspects and even enemy movement from Alice. It was a unique way to fight a boss, but it could have been executed so much better. It almost feels like they tried forcing the use of stealth mechanics here. You were supposed to sneak up and banish Twisted Alice. However, those mechanics work about as well for Audrey as they do us, and Allison ultimately stabs her doppelganger in the back, again, as the final blow. Here, I do feel the need to emphasize the disappointment that is banishment, Bendy in the Dark Revival's stealth mechanic. It's slow. You can't just run up on an enemy and banish them. You've got to crouch. Oftentimes, you're fighting in a fairly spacious place where other enemies can spot you easily approaching their cohort. It's just not fun to use, and they rope the idea into your last two boss fights, the final one being Ship-Ahoy Wilson. He is easily the most final boss-like fight in this game. You dodge his attacks, solve a small puzzle, participate in different phases of combat, before sort of defeating him. I don't have a ton of complaints with this fight. I sort of wish they did more with regular Wilson before he was ground into ink. However, that entire sequence is regulated to a cutscene of sorts. Overall, the boss fights were a letdown. You can tell that there is a significant shift between the first two bosses and the second two. I can understand the idea behind boss progression. You have the player fight a few new, unrecognizable bosses as a sort of fodder before the main event, but it doesn't work here. The Widow King fight isn't good, and Lord Amok should not count as a boss fight to begin with, let alone the second boss fight of the game. Twisted Alice and Ship-Ahoy Wilson are actually decent boss encounters, but the two fights leading up to them are executed poorly at best. Bendy and the Ink Machine sort of had the same pacing issue. However, Joey Drew Studios utilized main characters and story elements to mask the problem, whereas Bendy and the Dark Revival didn't get that same treatment. I can't say Bendy and the Dark Revival didn't try, though. This brings me to what I consider to be the game's most disappointing part: the ending. But broke, I hear you say. You get to play as the Ink Demon. That's freaking sweet. Sure, it's also pure fan service. This entire climactic ending serves as a smokescreen of sorts. It's big, and it's flashy, and it's fun, but if you stop and look at it, none of it really makes sense. Right as Ship-Ahoy Wilson is defeated, Audrey has her legs ripped off, and as she lay there dying, the Ink Demon gaslights her into fusing with him. What is going on here? This entire interaction throws the game into chaos. This is where Joey Drew Studios deploys the smoke bomb. They utilize spectacle and pacing to their advantage. We have just defeated the big bad of the game. What now? Well, we need the Ink Demon to watch the end to reset the cycle. Or did you forget about that? It's something we kind of touched on in Chapter 4, before Audrey inexplicably decided to trust the creepy janitor for some reason, who doesn't explain anything about his father in that sequence, by the way. Yes, let's trust the embodiment of an HR nightmare. That seems like a solid plan. This is one of the story issues that I would like to talk about at some point, but I am just going to briefly mention it here. Anyway, how do we get back on track? Ah yes, the ghost of Joey Drew in a Deus Ex Machina. It's a good thing Joey had exactly what we needed to end the game. That must have been what he went to get after his dramatic exit earlier. After his anime speech, and equally as dramatic exit, seriously, he is a master of those, Audrey, cosplaying as Beast Bendy, takes the MacGuffin and goes on a rampage to end the game. Joey Drew Studios nails the dramatic pacing in the waning moments of Chapter 5, at least from a story standpoint. In terms of physical game mechanics, the controls aren't that great. Do not try passing that off as Beast Bendy trying to regain control over his body. That is a cleverly disguised excuse that should not be tolerated. This sequence is where spectacle reigns supreme. If you like Bendy, you're gonna love playing as Beast Bendy. It's like a throwback to the days of unlockable characters. It's cool, it's okay to enjoy this mechanic, but realize this is just a big lazy means to an end. As Bendy pummels lost ones, the friends we've run into on our adventure help us make our way to the projector that ends the game. This is the climax of our story, and it's all Joey Drew Studios wants you to focus on. They do not want you to ask questions. They don't want you to ask why Audrey willingly gives into the Ink Demon, or how she's able to communicate with Allison or Henry as the Ink Demon. Heck, don't even ask why they're there, or how anyone managed to escape the pit. They don't want you to ask why the Lost Ones willingly attacked Beast Bendy, fully understanding it's a death sentence. Just focus on how cool it is to play as Beast Bendy. Look, he's got infinite health, which renders all of these enemies useless. They're more of a roadblock than anything, but hey, at least you've got all of these allies to help clear the way. They're definitely just here to remind you that you're playing a Bendy game, but it's the thought that counts, right? Remember when I said Bendy and the Ink Machine used main characters and story elements to mask problems? The last 5% of this game is how Bendy and the Dark Revival chooses to use the same tactic. They throw in every character you know from the first game to distract you from how poorly this ending is tossed together. Once you play the end, we're treated to a superhero-style monologue from Audrey. Seriously, slap the Avengers theme on this scene, and that's what it is.
My father once told me, just because we're born of darkness, doesn't mean we belong to it. We're always free to choose. And here, at the very beginning, there's a choice to make. My father's cartoon world was now known. To rule, to watch over, and to protect. I can make the cycle more favorable for my friends inside. But as for me, I'm the first of my kind. Born of Eve, but living in flesh. Joey's world is escaping into ours. So, what's next? Let me see.
I am going to run into a copyright issue with that one. Anyway, it leaves you with more questions and a feeling of amazement. Oh my god, she bent her finger back. Holy cow, it's Bendy in the real world. What? Stop. Lift up the curtain that is your astonishment and ask yourself why they picked this ending. To me, subjectively, it feels super out of place and sort of cringy. We have all seen a Marvel post-credit scene, which is only used to set up another movie. Joey Drew Studios has given you Phase 1. You got the Bendyverse team-up, okay? They're trying to get you to want more, just like Bendy and the Ink Machine. However, instead of designing a good game like Bendy and the Ink Machine, they gave you 4.5 chapters of trash and half a chapter of hype that tries to capitalize on its already established IP. Joey Drew Studios knows that they've got a golden goose. Okay, maybe a sepia-toned goose. Either way, they know that they can profit off of a franchise that people love, no matter what. Bendy and the Dark Revival proves it. It's in the game design, and it is very apparent by the end. Okay, I am going to wrap this first video examining why Bendy and the Dark Revival is a bad game. Yes, I said first. I tried sticking to game mechanics in this video. However, there are other elements that play into why this game is terrible. If you want to watch videos covering those reasons, consider subscribing to my channel. I personally ran into a few glitches during my first playthrough, and I know others have experienced issues like that as well. I would love to make a video exploring those, as well as a video examining Bendy and the Dark Revival from a story standpoint, exploring character motivations or lack thereof. Stuff like that. If you've made it to the end, thank you for watching. I appreciate it so much. Feel free to leave your opinions down below in the comments. I am definitely open to hearing your thoughts and constructive criticism on my video, especially if you've made it this far. I am probably going to receive the wrath of the Bendy fandom, which is something that I'm willing to accept. I just hope that some of them can see and understand why I made this video. On that note, good job, team.